Welcome, God's chosen ones. The undeniable truth has a way of revealing itself, doesn't it? When the light of authenticity shines bright, even the strongest skeptics find themselves reconsidering. Have you ever seen someone go from doubting you to defending you? It's a powerful transformation, one that speaks volumes about the divine favor upon your life. It's not just about your presence, it's about the undeniable impact of who you are and what you stand for. Before we go any further, take a moment to comment 999 below if you resonate with this truth. Your engagement is a light in this mission, and I want to express my deepest gratitude to those who have generously supported through super thanks. Your kindness fuels this journey, and your love is an incredible blessing. But here's the intriguing question. What could inspire such a radical shift in someone's perspective? Is it the evidence of God's hand working in your life, or the way your actions reflect a higher calling? Let's uncover the profound reasons why even those who once doubted you are now drawn to your side. Together, we'll explore how this divine recognition is reshaping the world around you. God's chosen ones. They know you're real. Someone has realized it and is now switching sides. People often hide behind masks. Day in and day out, they wear these facades, smiling when they're hurting, acting confident when they feel uncertain, or feigning loyalty while harboring secret doubts. It's an instinctive part of human nature, a way to protect ourselves from vulnerability or to fit in with the crowd. But what happens when someone starts to see through the surface? Have you ever experienced the moment when someone finally stops pretending and the mask begins to slip? Masks only work as long as no one looks too closely. When someone begins to see the truth beneath the facade, everything changes. And what if that person is you, whose authenticity shines through the layers? What happens when your realness cuts through the noise and forces others to question everything they once believed to be true? This is not about flashy words or dramatic actions. It's about consistency, the kind of consistency that quietly speaks volumes, louder than any grand gestures or promises. Think about it. When someone sees that you are the same person in private as you are in public, what do they start to realize about themselves and the people around them? It's as if a light has been turned on, illuminating everything that was once hidden. This moment is like a cold splash of water, shocking the person into a new realization. Suddenly, the people they've been loyal to, those they once admired, seem shallow and insincere, cheap imitations compared to the realness you embody. But here's where it gets intriguing. The switch doesn't happen instantly. First, they hesitate. Have you ever noticed how people often hesitate before making big decisions? They replay old conversations, reconsider past decisions, and start to notice the cracks in the foundation of the loyalty they once held. These cracks represent all the things they had ignored for the sake of convenience or fitting in with the crowd. But now that they've seen the truth in you, they can no longer ignore them. How does it feel when people finally start to see the truth that you've always known? It's like their entire perspective shifts. As it's written in James 1:5, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach." In this moment of clarity, they're seeking wisdom and understanding. They realize they've been living with illusions, and now they want something real, something authentic. The truth is, people long for authenticity, even if they don't recognize it at first. Have you ever been drawn to someone because of their unshakable authenticity? It has an irresistible pull, a magnetic quality that draws them in. As they observe you, unapologetically being yourself, they start to understand what they've been missing all along. Have you seen how those who stand firm in their beliefs attract others no matter the pressure? It's like they've been searching for someone to show them the way, and now that they see it in you, they can't turn away. Eventually, the mask they've been wearing, one that they thought protected them, becomes too much to bear. It suffocates them, and they begin to feel the pressure of it weighing down on them. They can no longer hide behind the facade. Can you remember a time when you had to remove your own mask and face the truth? The shift, which began quietly and subtly, becomes undeniable. When they make the choice to switch sides, it's not just a simple decision. It's a profound declaration of allegiance to what's real. And you, in turn, become the undeniable standard they now measure everything else by. Think about the biblical story of Daniel. He remained steadfast in his faith, even in the face of great opposition. Those around him, including the king, saw his authenticity and integrity and were drawn to it. His unwavering commitment to what was real in his relationship with God made him stand out. Isn't it fascinating how, in the end, the truth that Daniel carried was stronger than any mask those around him could wear? How much more powerful is it when we, too, become that beacon of truth and authenticity in a world full of facades? As you walk in your authenticity, you may wonder, how much of the mask am I still wearing in my own life? How many people around me are craving the truth that I carry? The reality is, once you embrace who you truly are, the power of that authenticity will resonate with others in ways you never imagined. People may start to switch sides, choosing the real over the fake. And when they do, you'll know that you've become the undeniable example of what it means to live in truth. What do you think happens when you become that example to others? How does your authenticity affect those around you? Truth has a unique way of cutting through every layer, no matter how thick the lies or distractions might be. It's not loud, and it doesn't need to be. Just like gravity, truth is silent, constant, and impossible to escape. Have you ever felt the weight of truth pulling at you, even when you tried to ignore it? People may fight it, deny it, or try to cover it up with falsehoods, but in the end, it always remains, silently waiting for them to wake up to it. When someone switches sides, it's often because the truth they've been avoiding has become too heavy to ignore. It's like trying to deny the gravity of the earth. It's there, it's undeniable, and eventually it will pull them in. Consider the story of the Apostle Paul, who initially fought against the truth with every fiber of his being. He persecuted Christians, believing he was doing what was right. But one day, on the road to Damascus, Paul encountered the truth in the most dramatic way. A blinding light knocked him to the ground, and a voice asked, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" Acts 9:4. At that moment, the truth could no longer be ignored. It wasn't about Paul forcing a change or convincing him. He was struck by the undeniable power of truth itself. What happens when the truth forces us to confront our actions, just as it did for Paul? At first, they might not even realize the shift happening within them. Maybe they started noticing inconsistencies or began to feel the weight of their own doubts. Perhaps they saw cracks in the foundation of everything they believed to be solid, or they realized that something didn't quite add up. Have you ever been in a situation where you thought everything was fine, only to discover that your assumptions were built on fragile ground? That's the moment when truth starts to reveal itself, gently but powerfully. It wasn't you forcing them to change, it was the truth, pulling them in like a force of nature. The truth doesn't need to be argued for, it doesn't need to be proven, and it doesn't require anyone's approval to exist. It just is. And that's the incredible magnetism of truth. Truth is magnetic because it doesn't need to be dressed up or embellished. It doesn't need to be adorned with fancy words or decorated in a way that makes it more appealing. It simply exists in its purest form. Just think about it. When you've come across someone who exudes honesty and authenticity, don't you feel drawn to them? It's like a force you can't explain, Have you ever felt that deep, compelling pull towards something real? That's the power of truth at work. When people begin to feel that pull, they realize how empty everything else has been, how much they've been living in illusions. They might try to resist the truth for a while. Ego and pride have a way of clinging to what's familiar, even if it's not right. But deep down, they know they can't fight forever. It's not about being right or winning them over. Have you ever tried to convince someone of the truth, only to find that no amount of argument could make them see it? Truth doesn't need anyone to validate it. It simply stands on its own. What if the real power lies not in forcing someone to change, but in letting the truth speak for itself? When truth begins to resonate, it doesn't need to be justified. It shatters illusions, clears away the confusion, and leaves everything else in its wake. Look at the example of King Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar had his dreams interpreted by Daniel, but despite the truth being revealed to him, he stubbornly resisted, even though the truth was in front of him. His pride and ego made him hold on to his illusions until he was humbled by God. Daniel 4:33-34. The truth didn't need to be force-fed. It eventually made its way to him, and when it did, it left him no choice but to declare, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven." Truth, in its own time, will always prevail. And when that happens, it's not just a matter of switching sides, it's deeper than that. They recalibrate their entire perspective. It's like when Paul encountered the truth on the road to Damascus. His whole life was turned upside down. When the truth reveals itself, it doesn't just change their opinions. It transforms their entire way of seeing the world. What if you, too, have experienced that transformative power of truth in your own life? The truth doesn't ask for permission, and it doesn't need anyone's approval. It just reveals itself, and once it does, no one can stay the same. Remember the parable of the prodigal son, Luke 15:11-32. The son went to great lengths to escape the truth, thinking he could live a life without consequences. But when he realized how empty and lost he truly was, the truth came rushing in, and he returned to his father. His entire perspective shifted, his eyes were opened, and the truth transformed him. The son didn't change because of someone's words. He changed because of the undeniable truth of his situation. When truth shows up, people move closer, not because they want to, but because they have to. It's like a magnetic pull they can't resist. Have you ever felt like you couldn't run from something, even though you tried to avoid it? The more they witness the power of truth, the more they realize that no matter how much they try to deny it, the truth has a way of finding them. And when it does, there's no turning back. It's like the moment when everything aligns and they understand finally that the truth was always there, waiting for them to see it. As John 8:32 says, "And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." When truth begins to break through the lies and the illusions, it doesn't just change your thoughts, it changes your heart. And for those who have been walking in darkness, the light of truth is like a beacon, guiding them back to what really matters. Once truth has revealed itself, no one can stay the same. Just like the magnetic pull of gravity, it draws us all closer, and in its presence, everything else fades away. How powerful do you think the truth can be in your own life? Energy doesn't lie. Long before someone admits they're reconsidering their stance or switching sides, they've already felt it in your presence. Have you ever walked into a room and instantly felt the energy shift, even before anyone spoke? It's not about what you say, how you dress, or even what you've accomplished. It's the energy you carry, that invisible, undeniable force that speaks louder than anything else. And here's the kicker. People can sense it, even if they don't fully understand it. How many times have you been drawn to someone's presence, not knowing exactly why, but feeling something magnetic about them? It's the energy they radiate. It all starts small. Maybe they notice how calm you are when everything around you is chaotic, how certain you are when everyone else is second-guessing themselves, or how your words hit differently, not because they're fancy, but because they come from a place of truth. Think about moments in the Bible when someone's presence changed the atmosphere, like when Moses descended from Mount Sinai, and his face shone so brightly from being in God's presence that people couldn't even look at him. Exodus 34:29-30. That energy, that glow, wasn't from Moses' own doing. It was the result of being in the presence of God. Your energy doesn't just enter a room, it lingers, reshapes the vibe, and forces people to pay attention, even if they don't realize they're doing it. Have you ever wondered why people are so drawn to you in certain situations? This isn't about being flashy or trying to dominate the room. It's about the kind of presence that feels steady, unshakable, the kind of energy that makes people question their own because it exposes where they're lacking. It's subtle but relentless, and it doesn't beg for recognition. It simply is. That's what gets under their skin in the best way. Think about the story of David and Goliath. David didn't boast about his abilities, nor did he try to appear mighty, but the energy he carried, his unwavering faith in God, was enough to shake the entire army of Israel. His confidence came not from his own strength, but from the power of God that was with him. How often do we forget that the strength we carry is not our own, but a reflection of God's power in us? The fascinating thing is, most people don't even connect the dots right away. They might think it's your confidence, your intelligence, or even just luck. But deep down, it's none of that. It's the energy you're putting out, and they feel it on a level they can't quite explain. Have you ever tried to pinpoint what exactly makes someone magnetic, only to realize it's something intangible? It's the energy they exude. Jesus, in Matthew 9:20-22, healed the woman who had been suffering from bleeding for 12 years, not by a word, but by the simple act of her touching his cloak. Jesus' presence carried the healing energy of God. This energy, though invisible, was tangible in its impact. Eventually it becomes impossible to ignore. They start leaning in, curious, trying to figure out what makes you different. Before they know it, they're aligning with you. Not because you asked them to, but because your energy spoke to something in them they didn't even know needed to be awakened. Have you ever experienced the moment when someone simply begins to align with your vision or path without you asking or pushing? It's not about convincing them with words, it's the energy of truth, of peace, or of purpose that draws them in. Think about the story of how the early Christians spread their message. It wasn't through grand speeches or large crowds at first. It was their energy, their faith, their love, and their commitment to the truth that drew others to them. Acts 4:13 says, "When they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished and took note that these men had been with Jesus." It was the energy of their relationship with Christ that spoke louder than anything else. What if the key to influencing others wasn't in the things you said, but in the energy you bring to every room? What if your steady, unshakable presence is the message that God is sending to those around you? Your energy has the power to awaken something in others, to help them see a truth they might not have realized. When you walk in the fullness of God's peace and purpose, that energy speaks for you, whether you say a word or not. Consistency is one of the most underrated forms of power. It doesn't demand attention or accolades. It doesn't scream for recognition. Instead, it quietly builds credibility, one small action at a time, until even the harshest skeptics can't deny its presence. Have you ever noticed how consistency has a way of making a person stand out, even in a crowd? It's like the steady pulse that keeps everything moving, even when no one is watching. When you are truly consistent, when you're unwavering in who you are, what you stand for, and how you show up, you create a force that is impossible to ignore. It doesn't require constant validation. It simply is. People, whether consciously or subconsciously, notice patterns. Have you ever thought about how others are watching you more than you might realize? They might not say it out loud, but every time you stick to your word, follow through on a promise, or hold the same values, no matter the situation, you're planting a seed in their mind. It's not about being flashy or extraordinary. It's about being dependable. Over time, they start to see that you're not just putting on a show or riding a fleeting trend. You're the real deal, and you're in it for the long haul. How much more powerful is someone who stays true to their word, regardless of the challenges they face? Think about the biblical example of Job, a man who, despite immense trials, never wavered in his faith. His consistency in trusting God, even when everything around him crumbled, became a powerful testimony. Even his friends questioned his integrity, but Job remained steady, proving that true consistency is a strength that can't be easily shaken. In Job 2:9-10, when his wife urged him to curse God and give up, Job replied, "Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" His unyielding consistency wasn't about perfection. It was about unwavering faith and trust. It wasn't his temporary victories that spoke the loudest, but his continuous faithfulness in the face of adversity. The thing about consistency is that it builds trust in a way nothing else can. It's easy to impress someone once, to make a good first impression, or to shine momentarily. But to do it over and over again, that's what truly sets you apart. Have you ever been inspired by someone who shows up day after day without fail? Their steady presence becomes a form of leadership in itself. Over time, even those who doubted you will start to feel the pull. They'll compare your unwavering presence to the fickleness of others and begin to understand why you stand out. Think about how the Apostle Paul's consistency in spreading the gospel, even through suffering and persecution, made him one of the most influential figures in the New Testament. His ability to endure and stay steadfast in his mission created a ripple effect that continues to influence lives today. Relentless consistency isn't about being perfect. It's about being dependable. It's about showing up authentically, no matter what. In a world filled with uncertainty, where loyalties shift and trends change with the seasons, how powerful is it to be someone others can count on, no matter what happens? Your consistency doesn't have to be loud or showy. It simply needs to be steady, solid, and true. And here's the truth. People crave that kind of stability. Just look at how Christ was described in Hebrews 13:8. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. His consistency in love, grace, and truth is a constant we can rely on. Eventually, it's not just that they recognize you, they can't help but respect you, because while others come and go, switch up, or fade away, you remain. And in the end, consistency isn't just a habit, it's a statement of who you are. Think about how a lighthouse remains steadfast, guiding ships through stormy seas. It's not about the grand gestures, it's about the consistent light it shines, no matter how dark the night or turbulent the waves. You too become that unwavering light in the lives of those around you. And as you continue to show up authentically, they'll see the power in your consistency, not because you've been perfect, but because you've been true. Integrity has a way of speaking without ever making a sound. It doesn't need to announce itself or demand attention. It simply exists, steady and undeniable. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to carry an unspoken strength? It's not because they boast or seek recognition. It's because their integrity speaks louder than any words could. Integrity is not about perfection or being morally superior. It's about alignment. It's about your actions consistently matching your words, even when no one's watching. It's easy to speak with conviction, but the true test comes when no one is there to hold you accountable. How many times do we find ourselves in situations where no one will notice if we take a shortcut? It's in those moments that integrity either stands firm or falters. When someone switches sides because of your integrity, it's rarely a dramatic moment. It's quiet, internal, and deeply personal. They've been watching you, maybe for weeks, months, or even years, paying attention to the little things. Think about how the Apostle Paul, through his actions and teachings, showed unwavering integrity even in the face of imprisonment and persecution. In Philippians 1:20 he says, "I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death." Paul's integrity wasn't about grand gestures, but about living out his beliefs every single day, even when it wasn't easy. Have you ever had someone observe your consistency, even in the quietest of moments, and realize that something in you stands out? They notice how you handle pressure, how you treat people who can't do anything for you, and how you navigate situations where taking shortcuts would have been easier. These moments stick with them, even if they don't say a word. Jesus, when he encountered the woman caught in adultery, John 8:3-11, didn't condemn her as others expected, but instead showed a quiet integrity, standing firm in his compassion and unwavering in his truth. His actions were a living testament to the alignment between his words and his deeds, and it changed the hearts of those who witnessed it. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone's integrity caused you to reflect on your own actions? What's powerful about integrity is that it shines brightest in contrast. When they compare your steadfastness to the inconsistencies around them, the difference becomes glaring. It's not that you're perfect, it's that you're real, and realness is rare enough to turn heads. In a world where people often wear masks, integrity stands out like a beacon. Think about the story of Daniel in the lion's den, Daniel 6. Despite the dangers, Daniel remained faithful to his God, and his unwavering integrity was so evident that even his enemies knew he would not compromise. His realness, his refusal to bend or hide his faith, shone brighter than the lies of those around him. How much power is there in simply being real, even when it feels like the world is asking you to be anything but? Switching sides often isn't about liking you more. It's about realizing they can no longer trust the side they're on. Your values become a mirror, reflecting what they've been tolerating or ignoring in others. Have you ever seen someone who, after being exposed to someone's unshakable integrity, starts to question their own loyalties? It's not about a sudden, dramatic shift. It's a quiet realization that builds up over time. Integrity doesn't need to convince anyone. It doesn't beg for approval or try to sway opinions. It stands firm, and that unshakable foundation is what pulls people in. When someone finally makes the shift, it's because they've seen the truth of who you are, and they want to be aligned with it, not because you asked them to, but because they couldn't deny it any longer. Jesus himself embodied this kind of integrity. In the Sermon on the Mount, he taught, "Let your yes be yes and your no be no." Matthew 5:37. Jesus didn't need to convince anyone of his truth. He simply lived it out. His integrity drew people to him, not through force or manipulation, but through the unshakable truth of his character. In the end, people didn't follow him because he demanded it. They followed because they saw something real and undeniable in him. Integrity, in its purest form, does the same thing. It invites others to come and see the truth for themselves. In a world full of noise, integrity stands as a quiet force that draws people in. not by persuasion, but by the sheer power of its consistency. How often do we underestimate the power of simply being who we say we are? Integrity doesn't need to shout for attention. It speaks through the consistency of our actions day after day. When we live out our truth with unwavering commitment, others can't help but notice. And in the end, it's that quiet strength that speaks louder than words ever could. Results don't lie, while words can be twisted, promises broken, and intentions questioned. Results stand as irrefutable proof. Have you ever been in a situation where someone's words were convincing, but when the time came, their actions didn't measure up? It happens all the time. People can talk endlessly, make promises, and even present grand plans, but at the end of the day, results are the true measure of success. They don't need explanations or defenses. They speak for themselves. Think about the story of David and Goliath. David didn't need to boast about his abilities or engage in long discussions about why he could defeat the giant. His action, taking down Goliath with one stone, spoke volumes. It wasn't his words that changed the course of events. It was the undeniable result of his faith in God. When people see you achieving what others only talk about, the conversation shifts. It's no longer about opinions or debates. It's about facts that can't be ignored. This is the power of undeniable results. They force people to reevaluate what they thought they knew. The skeptics who doubted you, they start rethinking their stance. The ones who dismissed you, they're now paying attention. And those who were on the fence, they're finally choosing a side, and it's yours. Remember the story of Noah and the ark? For years, people ridiculed Noah for building an ark, believing there would be no flood. But when the rain began to pour, all those who doubted him had no choice but to face the undeniable result of Noah's faithfulness. In the end, it wasn't his words, but the proof of the flood that made them take notice. That's the power of undeniable results. They shift perspectives and force a re-evaluation of everything once assumed. Have you ever seen a shift in others' attitudes once they witnessed results that couldn't be ignored? What makes results so powerful is that they cut through all the noise. In a world full of empty promises and flashy distractions, tangible outcomes are rare. They're proof that you don't just talk the talk, you walk the walk, and the evidence is right there for everyone to see. Think about how the Apostle Paul spoke about his own actions in 1 Corinthians 9:24-27. He didn't just preach about discipline and dedication, he lived it. His life became a testimony to the power of consistency and action. When people can argue with your methods, your personality, or your approach, but they can't argue with success, the conversation changes. They're left without words to defend their disbelief. This is where loyalty starts to shift. When someone sees consistent, undeniable proof of your effectiveness, it plants a seed of doubt about where their current allegiance lies. They begin to wonder why they're supporting people or systems that talk big but deliver little. That doubt grows until switching sides feels less like a betrayal and more like common sense. Consider how Jesus' miracles were the undeniable results that led many to follow him. His actions spoke so loudly that even those who questioned him couldn't deny his power. John 11:47-48 tells of how the chief priests and Pharisees feared that if they didn't act against Jesus, everyone would believe in him. His results, his miracles, were too powerful for them to ignore, and they knew it. People don't just follow someone because of their words. They follow because they see something real and powerful in the results. Undeniable results don't just win arguments, they win respect. They create a gravitational pull that draws people in, even if they were initially resistant. Have you ever had someone approach you after seeing your results and ask for your advice or guidance? It's the natural response to success. People are drawn to those who prove their worth through action. It's not about bragging or proving anyone wrong. It's about showing through action that you're the real deal. Jesus didn't need to defend his authority. His works spoke for themselves. John 14:11 says, "Believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me," or at least believe on the evidence of the works themselves. His results were undeniable, and it was these very results that drew people to him. And when the evidence is too strong to ignore, people can't help but gravitate toward you. Think about how many people have been drawn to successful movements throughout history, not because of the leader's words, but because of the results they achieved. When you walk in the power of undeniable results, you don't need to convince anyone. They'll come to you because they see something real. Just like the disciples were drawn to Jesus because of his works, your consistent actions will attract those around you. And in the end, it's not just about proving a point, it's about living out the undeniable truth of who you are and what you can achieve. There comes a moment when the curtain falls, and someone realizes they've been walking a path that leads nowhere. It's not a gentle revelation, it's a jarring, gut-punch realization that everything they believed in, defended, or stood for was built on a foundation of sand. Have you ever had that moment when you suddenly realized that the direction you were heading was all wrong? It can feel like the ground beneath you is crumbling, and everything you once stood firm on is now slipping away. That's when the switch happens, not because they want to, but because staying where they are feels like betraying themselves. The discomfort of staying in the wrong place becomes too great to ignore, and eventually they know they must make a change. This shift often begins with frustration. They start noticing cracks in the structure they've been standing on, the lies, the contradictions, the lack of progress. Have you ever been in a situation where you've noticed things starting to unravel, but you kept telling yourself it was all okay, only to realize that the cracks couldn't be ignored anymore? At first, they might brush it off, make excuses, or tell themselves they're just imagining things. But the cracks don't go away. They widen, and eventually they can't look past them anymore. The contrast between what they believed and what's really happening becomes impossible to ignore. It's like the story of the Israelites in the wilderness. Though they were promised a land of milk and honey, they spent years wandering in circles because they didn't trust God's timing. They were stuck on a path that wasn't leading anywhere, despite the promises. The cracks in their journey became too obvious to overlook. On one side is their current path, stagnant, hollow, and full of empty promises. On the other side is your path, clear, purposeful, and undeniably real. The difference is stark, almost blinding. It forces them to confront a truth they've been avoiding. What they believed in was never as solid as they thought. Have you ever seen someone shift from loyalty to doubt because they couldn't ignore the contrast anymore? It's like the prodigal son who left his father's house to chase temporary pleasures, only to find himself in the worst place imaginable, feeding pigs and longing for scraps. Luke 15:11-16. It wasn't until he realized that his path was a dead end that he returned home, not out of shame, but out of necessity for survival. Switching sides in this moment isn't a betrayal of their past. It's an act of survival. They're not just leaving their old path behind. They're choosing to align with something that feels right, even if it means admitting they were wrong. And that's not easy. It takes courage to walk away from what's familiar, even when you know it's a dead end. The courage to leave the wrong path, knowing it's the only way to move forward, is a step many resist taking. But once they do, there's no turning back. The relief of stepping onto solid ground, of finally aligning with something real, outweighs the discomfort of change. Just like the Israelites, when they finally entered the Promised Land, after wandering in the desert for so long, They found peace and purpose in the path God had always intended for them. They switched sides not because they were pushed, but because they were pulled by the undeniable truth of where they were meant to be. It's a powerful realization that the only way forward is to step into something that offers not just security, but fulfillment. This truth is something that can't be denied once it's felt. It pulls them toward it like a magnetic force, and in that moment, they finally understand why they had to let go of their old path. They aren't abandoning their past out of weakness. They're embracing the future with strength and clarity. Confidence that doesn't beg for approval is one of the most powerful forces in the world. It's not about being the loudest or the flashiest. It's about a quiet, unshakable certainty that says, I know who I am, and I don't need anyone's permission to be it. Have you ever encountered someone who simply exuded confidence without trying to impress anyone? It's the kind of confidence that doesn't need external validation or praise. It's rare, and that's exactly why it's so magnetic. When people encounter unapologetic confidence, it's like a shock to the system. Most are used to seeing insecurity wrapped in bravado or self-assurance tied to external validation. But when someone walks into a room carrying the kind of confidence that's rooted deep within, completely detached from opinions, applause, or criticism, it's impossible to ignore. Think about the story of Esther in the Bible. Esther's confidence didn't come from her royal position, but from knowing her identity and purpose. When she approached the king without being summoned, a dangerous act for anyone, especially a woman, she wasn't doing it to show off her courage. She was confident in her role and her calling to save her people. In Esther 4:16 she says, "If I perish, I perish." This is the kind of confidence that doesn't seek approval, but is rooted in truth and purpose. It's the kind of confidence that doesn't just command attention, it shifts the atmosphere. It's not arrogance either. Arrogance is defensive, insecure, and desperate for attention. True confidence doesn't demand anything. It's steady, grounded, and entirely self-sufficient. Think about the difference between a tree rooted deeply in the ground and a flower that needs constant attention. The tree doesn't beg for attention or validation, yet it stands strong and tall through storms and seasons of drought. True confidence, like the tree, doesn't need to prove itself to anyone. It simply is, and that's what makes it contagious. When someone sees you standing firm in your truth, they start questioning their own doubts and insecurities. They wonder what it would feel like to carry that same kind of certainty in themselves. Take the example of Jesus. His confidence was never loud or brash. When he walked among people, he didn't need to prove his power or greatness. He simply was who he was without apology. In John 14:9, when Philip asks Jesus to show them the Father, Jesus responds, "Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father." Jesus' confidence didn't come from an external need for approval. He carried an unapologetic certainty that spoke volumes in every action, every word. His confidence in his divine purpose was undeniable. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about living truthfully and fearlessly. That's the kind of confidence that attracts others. The beautiful thing is, this kind of confidence isn't loud. It's felt. It's in the way you speak, how you carry yourself, and the ease with which you navigate challenges. You're not trying to prove anything. You're simply existing as you are. Think about the effect it has when someone who is grounded in their confidence walks into a room. It's not about them boasting or dominating the conversation. It's the silent power they carry. People can sense it, even if they don't understand it. And that's what draws people in. Over time, they can't help but want to be closer to that energy. They start aligning with you, not because you've convinced them to, but because your confidence has made them question their own limitations. It inspires them, challenges them, and ultimately pulls them in. Think about how Paul's confidence in God's calling and his mission spread through the early church. His unwavering belief in his purpose, even in the face of imprisonment, was a quiet yet powerful force that inspired many to follow. It wasn't about his charisma, it was about his rooted confidence in God's plan for his life. Your unapologetic confidence becomes the quiet revolution that shifts everything. It becomes the change that others can't ignore. They may not even realize it at first, but slowly, the confidence you exude becomes contagious. People around you begin to reflect that same certainty in themselves, and it's not because you pushed them, it's because your quiet power inspired them to stop doubting and start believing. The more you stand firm in your truth, the more others will be drawn to it. And before long, your unapologetic confidence will have sparked a revolution of its own, quietly shifting the dynamics of everyone it touches. Long before anyone openly admits it, they've been watching you. Every word you speak, every decision you make, every move you take is being observed, analyzed, and filed away in their minds, often without them even realizing it. It's like an invisible thread connecting you to their thoughts, one they can't quite shake. Have you ever felt like someone was watching your every move, even when they weren't saying anything? It's not that they're overtly watching you. Sometimes it's subtle, but they're noticing everything, even when they don't acknowledge it. At first, they might not know exactly why they're drawn to you, but something about your consistency, your authenticity, or your quiet power keeps pulling them in. What is it about someone who is consistently true to themselves that attracts others, even when they don't seem to be trying? They might act like they're indifferent, even dismissive, but in reality, they're paying attention. People can often act like they don't care, especially when they feel insecure or threatened by someone else's strength. But even in their indifference, they're quietly observing how you handle adversity, how you treat others, and how you navigate challenges with a calm that's foreign to them. Think about how Joseph's brothers, who initially dismissed and betrayed him, couldn't help but notice the way he rose to power in Egypt. Even after all the hardship, Joseph maintained his integrity, and it was this steadfastness that eventually caused his brothers to recognize him, even though they didn't realize it at first. Genesis 42:7-9. The world may act indifferent, but they're always watching. Have you ever been in a situation where you were treated dismissively, only to later realize that your actions had made an impact on those around you? They may never say it, but they're impressed, even if they don't want to admit it. People often hide their true feelings, especially if they feel insecure about being influenced by someone else. They might never openly tell you how much they admire you or how much they've learned from you, but deep down, they're taking note of the way you live your life. It's like the story of David, who, despite his youth, was watched by King Saul and his army as he faced Goliath. They doubted him at first, but his courage and faith spoke volumes, and even though they didn't initially acknowledge it, they couldn't help but be impressed by his unwavering confidence in God. 1 Samuel 17:45-47. It's not about grand gestures or flashy acts. It's about quietly demonstrating integrity and confidence through your actions, and people can't help but notice. What's powerful about this is that it doesn't require you to perform or seek validation. While they're watching, you're just living your truth, showing up consistently, and being exactly who you are. You're not trying to impress anyone, you're simply existing authentically. In that way, your actions are far more powerful than any words could be. Every time you stay true to your values, every time you handle a situation with integrity or quiet confidence, those seeds take root in their minds. You're not performing for an audience, you're living out your purpose, and that is what inspires others. Have you ever realized that your true power lies in your ability to simply be yourself, without trying to seek approval or admiration? Then, one day it clicks. All those little observations come together in a powerful realization. They see that you're the real deal. They can no longer ignore it. It's like the moment when someone who's been silently watching finally realizes that they've been observing something authentic, something solid. The people around you may never verbally acknowledge how much you've influenced them, but when it finally clicks, they realize they've been seeing something worth following. It's not about you convincing them, it's about them suddenly realizing that what they've been watching all along was something worth aligning with. Just like the woman at the well, who, after her encounter with Jesus, went back to the town and told everyone about him, John 4:28-29. They might not have understood it immediately, but the realization becomes undeniable once it's there. And just like that, the switch happens. Not because you asked them to, but because the seeds you planted have finally grown into something undeniable. It's the power of consistency, authenticity, and quiet strength. When people start to realize what they've been observing all along, it shifts everything. They may not immediately tell you, but their actions will speak volumes. They'll align with you, not because you've convinced them with words, but because what they've seen in you resonates so deeply with them that they can't help but follow. Just as in the story of Peter and John in Acts 4:13, when the Sanhedrin saw the courage of the apostles and realized they were unschooled and ordinary men, they were amazed and took note that they had been with Jesus. Your authenticity and unwavering consistency will become the unspoken influence that changes everything. The power of influence is like a stone dropped in water. It doesn't just affect one spot, it sends ripples outward, touching everything around it. Have you ever witnessed a moment when a small, seemingly insignificant action sparked a much larger change? It's like when a single person stands up for what they believe in, and suddenly others feel empowered to do the same. When someone switches sides because they see the truth, it often doesn't stop with just them. That one shift sparks a domino effect, quietly and powerfully turning the tide. It's not always obvious at first, but once the first person makes the move, it's like a chain reaction starts, and soon others follow suit, often without even realizing why they're doing it. Consider the story of the early Christian church in Acts. When the apostles began boldly proclaiming the gospel despite persecution, their message didn't just remain with the 12 disciples, it spread like wildfire. One person's conviction, even in the face of adversity, started a ripple effect that transformed an entire society. It wasn't just the apostles who made the shift, it was their followers, and eventually entire communities were impacted by the change. Just like that, one person's shift in mindset can start a movement that grows beyond their control. Have you ever been the catalyst for change, even when you didn't set out to be? The thing about influence is that it doesn't need to be loud or in your face. It's often subtle. Think about how a quiet leader can inspire change without ever having to raise their voice. Someone notices the change in one person, the confidence they have now, or the success they've achieved, and they start to wonder if they're missing out. It's not about a loud proclamation or a forceful pitch. It's about the quiet, undeniable evidence of someone's growth and progress. When they see someone they trust make a decision, it creates a sense of safety. They start to think, maybe this is the right move after all. When Jesus called the disciples to follow him, it wasn't with force or coercion. It was the simple invitation to walk alongside him, and through his influence many others followed. Matthew 4:19 says, "Come, follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people." Jesus didn't force anyone to follow. He simply embodied the truth, and that made people want to follow. That's when the ripple effect takes hold. One person's decision to switch sides isn't just a personal choice. It becomes a signal to others that it's okay to change, to challenge the status quo, to align with something real. It creates a shift in the group's collective mindset, almost like a quiet revolution spreading through them. Just like in the story of Nehemiah rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, his leadership and faithfulness in rebuilding the city led others to join in. Nehemiah's one decision to take action sparked a collective effort, and in Nehemiah 2:18, the people responded, "Let us start rebuilding." The ripple effect of one man's vision became a collective movement. It's contagious. When others witness someone's growth, confidence, or success, they want to be part of it. They want the same thing for themselves. The movement is rarely about one individual. It's about what they represent. The Apostle Paul talks about how, through his own perseverance, others were encouraged to follow Christ. Philippians 1:14. When people witness real growth, real confidence and success, it becomes something they want to be a part of. Soon, that initial shift isn't just an isolated event. It turns into a movement, a transformation within a group, a sea change that can't be ignored. Imagine a group of people who have been stuck in old ways of thinking, hesitant to make a change. But then, one person, confident in their decision, steps forward and makes a bold move. That one decision becomes the catalyst for others to follow, and before long a group of people is united in their new direction. What started as one person's decision spreads like wildfire, and before you know it, your influence has changed not just one mind, but a whole group's direction. That's the power of influence, the ability to spark a chain reaction that leads to lasting change. The beauty of this ripple effect is that it often begins in the most quiet, subtle ways. A single act of courage, a moment of authenticity, or a display of unwavering confidence can shift the course of an entire group. When you align with truth, when you walk in purpose, others will naturally be drawn to that energy. You become a beacon for others to follow, and your influence spreads far beyond what you can see. The small, seemingly insignificant steps you take create a force of change, a movement that can't be ignored. What if you could see your influence, not just as a one-time act, but as a wave that continues to ripple through the lives of others, creating a lasting impact for years to come? There's something incredibly powerful about challenging someone's narrative, especially when they didn't even realize they were living inside a story that wasn't theirs to begin with. Have you ever noticed how people can become so entrenched in their beliefs that they don't even question the story they've been telling themselves? It's as if they've adopted someone else's version of reality without even realizing it. When you step into their world, consistently challenging what they believe to be true, you force them to confront the cracks in their own mindset. It's not about outright confrontation. It's about the quiet, relentless questioning that makes them reconsider their assumptions, their values, and even their allegiances. Think about how Jesus challenged the Pharisees. He didn't directly attack their beliefs with insults or accusations. Instead, he spoke truth in a way that exposed the inconsistencies in their interpretations of the law. He challenged their narrative by living out the truth in front of them, calling them to recognize the hypocrisy in their ways. In Matthew 23:27, Jesus says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead, and everything unclean." Jesus didn't need to shout or argue. He simply lived out the truth, and that alone was enough to challenge their false narratives. What if we could challenge the false narratives of the world, not by confrontation, but simply by living authentically and unapologetically? The beauty of this challenge is that it doesn't require you to be loud or combative. You don't need to attack their beliefs. Just live yours unapologetically. Think about how the Apostle Paul, in the face of intense opposition, continued to proclaim the gospel and live according to his faith. He didn't force anyone to believe, but by staying true to his convictions, he naturally challenged the status quo. In Philippians 1:20, Paul writes, "I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage, so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death." Paul's life was a challenge to the Roman Empire's narrative of power, status, and conformity. He didn't need to argue, his life was the proof. In what areas of your life could you stand firm in your truth and challenge the narratives of those around you? By being the living proof of what they once thought impossible or illogical, you force them to face the uncomfortable truth that their narrative no longer fits. At first, they might try to rationalize it, ignore it, or justify their old beliefs. It's easy to hold on to something that feels safe and familiar, even if it's no longer true. But think about how, over time, a person's unshakable authenticity forces others to question their own beliefs. The more they see you living in a way that directly contradicts everything they've been taught or told, the harder it becomes to deny. For example, when Daniel was in the Babylonian court, his unwavering commitment to God's laws challenged the narrative of the Babylonian Empire. Despite the pressure to conform, Daniel's faithfulness to God's principles made him stand out, and even King Nebuchadnezzar had to acknowledge the power of his God. In Daniel 3:28, Nebuchadnezzar says, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants." They begin to question everything, from the people they've trusted to the systems they've relied on. It's not that you're convincing them with arguments, it's that your life is the proof that something else is possible. When those beliefs start to crumble, the shift happens naturally. Just like the prodigal son, who left his father's house and tried to live by a narrative that promised fulfillment, but only led to emptiness, they too begin to realize that what they've been following is a dead end. When the son finally returns home, he's no longer bound by the false narrative he had believed. He chooses to align himself with something real and true. In Luke 15:18-19, he says, "I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you.'" Aligning with you becomes the only logical choice. It's not about convincing them or making them agree with you. It's about showing them that their current narrative is built on sand, while yours stands on solid ground. In Matthew 7:24-25, Jesus tells the parable of the wise man who built his house on the rock, saying, "Therefore everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock." Your authenticity, grounded in truth, is the rock upon which people can build a better narrative. And in that moment, they realize the only way forward is to embrace a new story, one where they are no longer chained to outdated beliefs, but are free to align with something real and undeniable. This is where true transformation happens, not through force or persuasion, but through the quiet power of living out your truth. When someone sees that your story is not only believable, but undeniable, they can't help but want to be part of it. And that's when the shift happens. It's not just a change in perspective, it's a change in narrative. And once they've embraced that new story, they'll know they can never go back. Greatness has a way of demanding attention, even when you try to stay out of the spotlight. It doesn't scream for recognition. Instead, it quietly draws people in with its quiet confidence, its relentless drive, and its undeniable presence. Have you ever noticed how someone who is truly great doesn't need to announce it to the world? Their actions, their attitude, and their presence speak louder than any words ever could. When someone is truly standing in their power, fully embracing who they are and what they're capable of, there's a magnetic pull that others can't ignore, no matter how much they try to look the other way. It's like the story of David, who was anointed king long before he sat on the throne. Despite being overlooked by his own family, David's greatness wasn't hidden for long. His victory over Goliath wasn't just a physical triumph. It was a demonstration of inner greatness that couldn't be ignored. 1 Samuel 16:12-13. People may try to look away from greatness, but sooner or later it forces them to take notice. The fascinating thing about greatness is that it doesn't require validation or applause. It exists unapologetically, whether people recognize it or not. This is the beauty of true greatness. It doesn't need anyone's approval to exist. Just like the story of Joseph, who despite years of betrayal, imprisonment and hardship, never stopped believing in his purpose, greatness shines through regardless of external circumstances. When Joseph was elevated to power in Egypt, it wasn't because he sought recognition or applause. It was because he remained steadfast in his integrity and purpose. In Genesis 41:46, we see Joseph's greatness recognized when Pharaoh declares, "I am Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift hand or foot in all Egypt." Joseph didn't beg for recognition. His greatness was undeniable, and it commanded attention. When you remain unbothered by the doubters or naysayers, when you continue moving forward with unwavering belief in yourself, your light becomes impossible to miss. It shines through the cracks of the noise, rising above the distractions and the criticisms until it becomes undeniable. People can only pretend not to see it for so long. They can resist, they can stay loyal to their old beliefs, or they can stay in their comfort zones. But greatness is contagious. Have you ever seen how someone's unshakable confidence makes others start to question their own limitations? It's almost as if greatness creates a new benchmark for what's possible. Just as the Apostle Paul, despite his past as a persecutor of Christians, became a beacon of light for the early church, inspiring others with his boldness and faith. Acts 9:20-22. Greatness doesn't just affect the person who embodies it. It ripples outward, pulling others along. As people witness you continue to shine, unaffected by the opinions of others, they begin to question their own hesitations, their own choices. They start to see what's possible, what's achievable, and wonder if they've been missing out on something much bigger than themselves. That's when they start gravitating toward your light. It's like the way light pulls someone out of darkness. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, but unmistakably. They don't need convincing. They can feel the warmth of your power. Your presence becomes a beacon, and those who were once indifferent or unsure can't help but be drawn to the energy you radiate. Just as the light of Christ draws those who seek the truth, your greatness, rooted in authenticity and purpose, becomes something others can't ignore. Jesus' greatness wasn't in his outward appearance, but in the transformative power he carried. In John 8:12 he says, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Greatness, like light, draws others to it. It creates a path for them to walk towards something greater than they've known. Greatness doesn't stay hidden forever, and when it finally emerges, it pulls others toward it like a force of nature. Have you ever seen how the rise of someone's true potential can create a wave of transformation around them? What starts as a quiet, almost unnoticed force becomes a powerful movement. As your light grows, so does its ability to inspire others. Those who were once on the sidelines or unsure will begin to see your example as the new direction they want to follow. And before you know it, your greatness becomes not just a personal journey. It becomes a source of inspiration, hope, and transformation for everyone who encounters it. Greatness, when fully realized, has a way of pulling others into its orbit, making it impossible for them to resist the energy it creates. In the end, real recognizes real. And it doesn't just stop at recognizing it, it gravitates toward it. When you stand firm in your truth, when you consistently live with integrity, when your results speak louder than your words, people can't help but be pulled into your orbit. They may start off skeptical, hesitant, or unsure, but sooner or later, they'll see the undeniable force of who you are. Your confidence, your authenticity, your quiet power, all of it will shine through. And those who have been watching, even from the sidelines, will find themselves drawn to the light you radiate. You don't need to chase validation or try to convince anyone of your worth. The energy you project, the truth you live, and the results you deliver will do the work for you. People will start switching sides. Not because you demanded it, but because they see something real in you that they can't ignore. And when that shift happens, it's not just a personal victory, it's a ripple effect, a movement that spreads far beyond what you could ever imagine. Greatness doesn't need to shout or beg for attention, it simply is. And those who are ready for it will find their way to you, whether it's one person or an entire group, so keep standing in your power, unapologetically, unwaveringly. Because greatness in all its quiet brilliance has a way of becoming impossible to overlook. And when it happens, there's no turning back. As God's chosen ones, you are walking in a divine purpose that cannot be ignored. The authenticity of your faith, the strength of your spirit, and the light you radiate are undeniable. People who once doubted you are now seeing the truth, and some are even shifting their allegiance, recognizing the power of God's presence in your life. This transformation is a testimony of His greatness and a reminder that when we stand firm in our calling, others will take notice and be drawn closer to His truth. Remember, your journey is just beginning, and as you continue to walk in His favor, many will witness the change in your life and want to be a part of it. Keep shining, keep believing, and keep trusting in God's perfect plan for you. If this message has blessed you, I invite you to support this channel through a donation via Super Thanks. Thank you so much for your generosity. Whether you choose to donate or not, your support means the world. Please, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this message with others. Leave a comment below and let me know how this resonates with you. I pray God's abundant blessings upon you today and always. May He guide your steps and surround you with His peace.